Well, Guy, thank you again for being so gracious to speak to us today. It's really appreciated.
It's my great pleasure, believe me. I've no idea why you think I have any knowledge and all those good things, but it's great to be here. Arvind, I would tell all of you that both Monish and I have been extremely impressed with Arvind, and I would tell you that just what is it? So I'll just start off like this, which is a great way to start, and then we'll launch into questions, is that I have figured out that, as you read in the book, there are many things that I don't do very well. And a simple idea is that if I can just figure out what I don't do well and stay away from it, I'll get better. And if I figure out what I don't do well and have friends who do it better, then that's a good thing. And so what I figured out with Monish Pabrai is that he's an incredible judge of people. And there have been a few times in my life where I've met somebody that I thought was great, and it turned out, and Monish did not think they were so great, and he's always been right. I'm just not as good as he is at judging people. I hope to get better, but I think that the simple idea of just saying, you know what, I'm not so good at that. I have somebody here in my life who is. So, for example, my custodian is Monish's custodian. The people who do tax work for Monish do tax work for me. About a year and a half ago, I switched legal firms to him. So why? Because he's selected better partners to do business with, and it's amazing. My business has improved as a result. And so just over to Arvind, Monish has a very, very good sense of people, and he thinks very highly of Arvind. I do as well, but I trust Monish's judgment better. And you guys are very lucky to have him as a teacher. So
I'm very flattered. Thank you, Guy.
Yeah, that was the whole point. It's actually all of you. In addition to my cappuccino machine, I'm really into chocolate labs, and I found out when I was last in Boston that Arvind has a chocolate lab. So I just want to find my way. Once I've gotten my way to Arvind's chocolate lab, I can just drop the friendship with Arvind and just stay with the lab.
Well, I look forward to it. You can witness me cleaning up after my dog, and you know what? You yourself can, for free, you yourself can participate in that wonder.
It's the only reason why I'm doing this, Arvind, because you can't provide me with coffee. I actually think that, there's this psychological concept of sublimation. Sublimation is taking something that might be negative, a negative drive, and turn it into something positive. I'm married, and so I have one place to direct my sex drive. It's in my marriage, but I think there's this. So yeah, you're going to wonder where this is going. But Anthony Robbins says that one way that you can sublimate sort of the sex drive that you have in addition to your spouse is to use it in business. And I think that when you look at what Warren Buffett is up to, I think there's the same seeking mechanism that exists in our brains to find a mate. One of the things that Warren has done to rewire his brain is that seeking drive is seeking out great opportunities. And you can even tell, I mean, in 1974, he said that, he was feeling like a sexed up man in a nightclub, I think, when the market was at a low. So he even used that sexual analogy. And, so if you imagine when you say, how am I looking for ideas? I think that the sort of the wiring in our brains that we're seeking to tap is the same kind of wiring that we'd be using if we were looking for a mate. And I think that the answer you're expecting to get, or might have been expecting to get, is an answer that says, oh, well, I run screens every day and I read all these different publications. And the whole point about that is what that doesn't get is it's sort of like going into our neocortex. The whole problem with every single one of us, each one of you sitting in this room, is we're all being trained all day long with grades and with our professors and name it, to get into the neocortex of our brain, which sits on the top. I know that you can see me here, so I don't know if you can see. If If the fist that I'm holding is the brain, then you have the neocortex that sits on top. It's the part where all this conceptual thinking is going. But I put to you that all of the really important stuff is going on deep down in the mammalian and the reptilian brain. So how do we tap that? If we imagine that the search for great ideas is a bit like the search for a great life and marriage partner, and so how do we do that? I mean, if we don't, I mean, at least the days when I was dating, it didn't happen on internet sites, and it didn't happen by putting a bunch of your criteria into some kind of computer program. You'd be looking everywhere all the time, up and down, and your brain would be aware. And so I think, so the answer is it's difficult in the same way that any of us who's looked for a mate in life have found it difficult. But our brains have amazing seeking mechanisms to find the things that we want and need. And if we can somehow associate in our mammalian, in our deep instinctual brain, great investment ideas with fulfillment, which I think is deeply associated in Warren Buffett's brain and Monish Pabrai's brain, that's how you become a lifelong acquirer of great investment ideas. And, it's got nothing to do with finance, but so how, I think that once so I'll give you an example of what happens. One of the first investments that I had was in a credit rating company called Duff & Phelps, which I bought at 7 times earnings. It had no debt. It had just been spun out of another company, which was also called Duff & Phelps. And the company ended up going up 7 or 8 times on me. And I have a deep association. That was a very pleasurable experience for me. Over a 2.5-year period, it went up 7 times. I made an enormous amount of money. I have a deep association with the characteristics of that company and making money and feeling good and, nirvana and all of those good things. So I think that I have an activated sense of when circumstances might be the same. And I've never experienced that exactly the same. But when I looked at, a few years later, I looked at the Indian credit rating company CRISIL. Well, first of all, it was exactly the same industry. Second of all, it was a similarly low valuation. So there are a number of similarities. It wasn't entirely the same, but there's one example. But that's just looking for credit rating companies in different countries in the world. And I would just jump to another very powerful idea. I mean, I talk in the book about frontline tankers, which I learned about at the Pabrai Fund's meetings. And there's just this simple idea that when you have a capital good where the price of what it produces has gone below the cost to produce it. So in the case of frontline tankers, the price of tankers in the market was below the level at which it was profitable for shipyards to manufacture tankers. You had a situation where there was a depressed market, but the catalyst was already there. Nobody was supplying any new product to the market. And I think that has applications in so many different industries. And again, that's an idea that until I came across it in the Pabrai Fund's meeting, I didn't fully understand it. But even then, what I understood in the idea was the intellectual idea of it. What Monish Pabrai had experienced is he'd made an enormous amount of money in frontline tankers, so he had this deep emotional association. So how do we look for ideas? I think we need to find these things that work, and then we need to start doing them, and hopefully through success, that gets wired in to the point where I think at some point it just becomes second nature. And I wouldn't say that it's second nature for me, but I do think it's second nature for Warren Buffett. And until we get there, we just have to keep trying to get those experiences that will wire that in. Arvind, if I can bring sex into every question, I think I'll be doing fine.
Right. Well, so there's a challenge for you throughout the rest of the conversation.
Yeah, we'll see. And here's what's fascinating. What I used to do is I had this idea that what I wanted to do was pay up for better businesses. And there are still, businesses that are not extraordinarily cheap that are better businesses in my portfolio. But you know, Monish said it recently somewhere, and Warren said it many times. If you need to use a spreadsheet, then it's not cheap enough. And so, in a certain sense, and this is going to be really hard for a bunch of people who've just spent n months studying, and I don't know how many discounted cash flow models you guys have done, where you're anally going through a spreadsheet trying to figure out what the free cash flow is of the business, and maybe it's an LBO type cash flow model where you have to apply it to debt and you have to pay down the debt, and you've got all these sort of cash flow waterfalls, and oh my God, it's hard work, and maybe there's an error in the spreadsheet, and all of that develops a mindset in us that makes us think that if we're not modeling it through a complex spreadsheet, then how can we be doing serious work? And so the statement by Warren Buffett is, you want to buy things when it's as easy as shooting fish in a barrel. Actually, not just shooting fish in a barrel, shooting fish in a barrel after all the water's run out. And you may not believe this, but if the fact that it's extraordinarily cheap is not just screaming at us in the face, it's probably not a good buy. And when it's extraordinarily cheap like that, it's just, and I'll give you some examples in a second. It's not, there's no analysis, or even you could argue that there's no technique. It's just freaking obvious. And when you're starting to get into situations where you have to model the cash flows, where you're sort of like trying to be cute and smart about where the business is going to be, then that's already an indication that it's not cheap enough. So to have a business that is debt-free, that produces free cash in excess of net income and is trading at a single-digit multiple of that, is prima facie cheap. It's a single-digit multiple. If it's trading at 17 times earnings, it's not cheap. Right. And so ideally, we're never buying anything that's at a 17 multiple. So clearly, simple multiples of earnings is one thing to do. And so where I've gotten into trouble with, I think that I've gotten into big trouble just paying too high multiples of earnings. And what those don't take into account is this concept of Tobin's Q, or replacement value of the assets. And so I think that when I've bought something that appears to be a moderate multiple or a cheap multiple of earnings, but I don't have this concept of replacement value of assets, from time to time I've gotten into trouble. And so, Warren Buffett talking about the Wall Street Journal, I can remember, I think he said something like this. This was like before the internet came along, but he said, give him any amount of money and he would not be able to recreate the franchise that the Wall Street Journal had. So he was saying that the sort of like the replacement, the cost to replace or to create in competition with the Wall Street Journal a similar business was inordinately high, perhaps impossible to recreate. I would tell you guys that today, take one of the CSX or Burlington Northern or any one of the major railway companies in the United States, and I don't think you could pay somebody any amount of money to recreate their networks, because what are you going to do in some of these towns? What are you going to do? Buy up houses and lay railway track? I mean, nobody's going to you're not going to get the right of way to buy the houses, to tear them down and lay the railway tracks, and there's just no space anymore. So I guess having an eye on replacement value is a good thing, but I just think that this concept of, and maybe I'm not being very analytical, but it's screamingly cheap. There's something that just makes you go, it sort of jumps out at you. And I think a business that has been generating more free cash than earnings for every year it's been in existence, that's trading at a single-digit multiple, for example, that's just been spun out, as Duff and Phelps was, is cheap. I would also tell you that you can trip up on the replacement value concept. So one investment that I had that I was very excited about it, not very excited, but I thought was a really solid investment that didn't work out for me, was this company Eurotunnel. And I maybe don't have the figures exactly right, but if I'm not mistaken, it was the cost of creating that tunnel was about 15 billion pounds. So, I felt like you could make a good assumption that the replacement value of that asset was 15. You could in theory dig a tunnel right next door, or somebody else could get a franchise and dig a tunnel right next door. So call it 15 billion pounds replacement value. And when you took all of the instruments, there are a whole bunch of instruments that were trading there, but when you put them all together, the total market cap of those instruments came to, I think, 2 or 3 billion pounds. So I was saying this is an utter fraction of replacement value. And then and then you could look at the instruments themselves and look at the cash flows that were being generated by the business and say, yeah, and they're also cheap relative to the cash flows that were being produced. So that investment did not work out for me because, there are many assets where they get created for an enormous sum of money, but they're actually not worth that. So you have somebody put up a building with, gold-plated windows, and it cost them whatever it cost them, $100 million, but actually the willingness it can only carry $30 million of value. So you get led astray by the replacement value idea. But I would also put to you as the group that we just have to be multifaceted about valuation. We cannot just stick to one method of valuation because the world is constantly changing. The nature of what is cheap is constantly changing. If something is cheap today, or if there are a set of investment ideas that are cheap today, it's quite possible that a whole bunch of people will figure that out and they'll start arbitraging that away. So we're constantly on the search for new ways of looking at the world that enable us to be sure that something is cheap. And that will also involve assessing the cheapness in different ways. So, the really facile things like what's the dividend yield or what's the price to earnings ratio. And I think that Tom Russo has this idea of, when you fly the airplane, you can't just look at one indicator. You've got to look at 5 indicators. So you've got to have, 3, 4, 5 things that you're looking at. But 2 would be replacement value of the assets. What can I figure out? Now, I would tell you, on the other hand, if you take a company like Apple, I have no clue what the replacement value of the assets are, and I think that the replacement value is fluctuating. So I think that is a very, very difficult number to come by in the case of Apple, and probably in the case of most tech companies. It's an incredibly easy number to come by in the case of something like Frontline Tanker. And then you have, even then the nature of the estimation changes. Frontline Tanker, you can go to shipyards, you can find out what it costs to produce a tanker. At the peak of the market, the trough of the market, you'll get a reasonably good range for what the replacement cost is. In the case of a railway network, you know that it's probably an awful lot plus a bit more. And so, you can put maybe a lower bound on it, but even putting a lower bound on it is hard. It's just an extremely high number. So it's not just getting a sense of what the numbers might be and where the errors might lie and in which direction. Have I got a tight bound, or where can I go wrong? Is there a hard downside to what the replacement value is, or could the replacement value go to 0? As with, I would argue, the Wall Street Journal, as a result of the internet, maybe it's not so hard to recreate a franchise like the Wall Street Journal today because you have the barriers to entry have gone to zero to very, very low. So I don't know if that's helpful. And in some level, I just don't think you can replace actively and creatively continuing to learn and think and understand. And worth adding that I was asked, so there are a number of businesses, a number of acquisitions that Berkshire have made that I don't understand. I can't really get it. So we continue to seek to understand, and hopefully we get a little bit better so that every now and then we think we can nail something. I think that it's, we don't have to be perfect. We just have to try to improve from where we are. So I think that it's definitely not talking. And I think that, often the other thing is it depends how much you know about the industry and whether you've looked at it before. So I would tell you with POSCO, the penny dropped for me when I was directed to the corner of Berkshire and Fairfax, and there was a great discussion of all the factors that made this an interesting investment. And it was over 3 or 4 different commentators, and they had links to various things. And I followed that through, and I was like, oh my God, that makes so much sense in the world. And to get to a point where I know I don't know everything, but I feel quite confident that I know enough that I can describe the parameters of what this thing is likely to do. So I felt like I got to a place where I could say, the likelihood that this thing trades much lower than it's trading at is just very unlikely, given where the industry is, given where the price of steel is, given that they're the low-cost producer, and the probability that it trades a lot higher is off the charts. And I could tell that because, I mean, there's a chart that I presented at the value. So in that case, it was a discussion by some smart people at the corner of Fairfax and Berkshire. But something that I really like about that website is that the atmosphere of the posters at that website is it's friends helping friends. And people who write things up there tend not to be egotistical or tend not to be trying to prove something. When there's some really great minds on Value Investors Club, but often they're also trying to prove that they're smart, either to themselves or to the community or to maybe their bosses who would read it. But I do think that some of those kind of peer discussion boards are some incredible sources. I would prefer to read it up on the corner of Fairfax and Berkshire than to hear somebody tell me, even if it's exactly the same information. Then when it comes to, I mean, 10Q and K, I can't stand reading them on the screen. I actually, printing them out, I do from time to time or often, but it's not fun reading printed out documents. I really love to receive them, the original printed ones on that very thin toilet papery sort of type paper. And I think that, I'm not trying to be anal about this idea of going for the best sources first, but if there's a press release and a 10K or Q sitting on my desk, I will try to pick up the 10K or Q first. But I'm not trying to be anally correct about it. I'm just trying to just change the order a little bit so that it's a little bit more in the direction of what I set out in the book. And it's not like I'm sort of mechanically saying, okay, now I cannot look at this, now I will look at this, then I will look at this. I'm just trying at the margin to modify a little bit. And you could actually argue that the chapter in the book is an exercise. You guys think I was writing that for you. I was actually writing that for me to sort of like increase my propensity to act in that way. I would just share with you all, I think there's a really, really powerful way of thinking that I'm certain Warren engages in, imagine that every action, so you're in your office, you're in your dorm room, I'm in my office, and there's all sorts of materials there. There's the latest Men's Health, there's annual reports, there's the letter from the dean, there's the invitation to something. I mean, there's all that stuff sitting there. And I think that to take every action and to think of it as if it's going to stand in time for eternity and say, because, every time we do something, we're building up the habit of potentially doing that. What is it? So from the psychology literature, neurons that fire together wire together. So the more we do something, so if you think of yourselves, or if I think of myself in my office when I'm sitting there and there's the invitation to some party on the left of my desk, and in the middle there's a press release, and on the right there's a 10Q or 10K, and I say to myself, I have this mindset that says, my actions in doing this are going to sort of stand in eternity, and I have to act right now consistent with how this will build up my life over the next 30 years of doing this. And by reaching for the 10K, I'm not just reaching for the 10K in this moment, I'm increasing the probability that I'll do that kind of action over the invitation over the course of my lifetime. So you imbue even the most minor things with a profound significance. and then you just keep doing it. And actually what you're doing is you're not sitting in your office saying, I wonder if this is a good investment idea. You're sitting in your office saying, oh my God, I am wiring myself for success by the simple choice of whether I choose to pick up the invitation first or the 10Q. So, but and I think that, Arvind, when you think of the import of your questions, or sort of the direction of your questions, so this sort of idea of so you ask, how do you process the information? What is your investment process? And the assumption behind that is that I can all the time direct my mind to do it the way I want to do it. And instead, we want to kind of think of this idea of, the chains of habit are too light to be felt until they're too hard to break. And so let's forget about sort of how do I want to direct my attention. It's in how do I continually build up the right habits, if you like,
Right.
Knowing that they'll be broken and knowing that I'm not going to keep to them, but I just need to keep these habits going and to strengthen the things that are productive and de-emphasize the things that are not productive. Sorry, Arvind, I spoke to a journalist today and I was just talking, there's so much, that all of you, for the book I wrote about 150,000 words, of which about 70,000 made it into the book. So there's like another 80,000 sort of like pearls of wisdom that didn't make it in there. And, so John Wooden, this famous basketball coach. He used to start off every season teaching the basketball players how to put in their socks. And you think, what's socks got to do with scoring goals or scoring baskets, scoring points? And, it's this idea of scoring points is too hard, but let's just start with the socks. And then we'll move on to the laces. And then this idea of building up from the fundamentals, I think, is a lot easier. And to go into your office or to go into and say, I'm now going to, deliver 30% annualized for the rest of my life is a very daunting task. But to say, I'm going to go into the office and continually build the habits that I know will improve my investment process is something that's quite doable. And it's this idea that, and again, academics, and I don't want to sort of slander academics, but you take a book is interesting because it has 2 or 3 big ideas in it. A great history will kind of like focus on 2 or 3 big ideas about the person. And that makes it very readable and it makes it very satisfying and enjoyable for us to read. But I think the truth is that it's, Sam Walton, you could say, well, the story of Sam Walton was stack 'em high and sell 'em cheap, but actually it was, the devil is in the details, or God is even better. God is in the details. It's just like so many small things, time and again, done consistently, that eventually build up that success. And I just tell you all, I have done so little of that. I'm just a beginner. I've just done such a small amount of it. If I'd done a really substantial amount, I'd be a billionaire. Instead, I'm not, But what's so wonderful is that even if you do such a tiny amount, the results are so extraordinary. I mean, for me, the inner scorecard is a kind of it's less to do with valuation than to do with how am I doing as a person, it's just to, there's no, the inner scorecard is not something that you could measure in any particular way. It's just about it's about gaining the confidence inside myself to know that when the world disagrees with me, that's okay. And because what I, and it's actually, it may be a sign that I'm onto something really good. That right. And I think that outsiders, I think that many outsiders do well as value investors because they're used to being out of sync with the crowd. But so I don't think I've had as much trouble buying things that the rest of the world isn't buying and having returns that are different to the rest of the world. I think that, for example, in my case, where actually what made me happy was to be living a quiet life, doing whatever sport I was doing, and doing some investment research every day. that made me happy. But I was in a world in which people were being judged by what their assets under management were and whether they had a gleaming office tower building in New York City. And I didn't have the distinction of just being able to say, well, outer scorecard and inner scorecard, I know what makes me happy, and chasing after that stuff won't make me happy. So I kind of lost my way for a little bit in New York. But it's not about measuring anything on the inside. It's just knowing the distinction, I would say. Such a great question. I would tell you that, so we have children. My daughter just turned 10, and they went into a Montessori school 5 years ago. And I don't want to get into lots of detail of Montessori education, but we can if you like. But I realize now that Montessori education is actually about developing the inner scorecard. I found it fascinating that then subsequently I read that both Sergey Brin and Larry Page of Google had done Montessori education, and I found that absolutely fascinating. So I have a good sense of how to do it with younger children. And I think that this terrible distortion that happens as we go through our teenage years and universities where, it's just the people who are doing it don't realize it's all outer scorecard. It's what's your grade? What did you score? What's your GPA average? That's, us turning into guinea pigs to because, and that stuff really counts because it makes a big difference to where we go to university, where we go to school, all of those things. So I think you get to 22, you've been spat out the other side of that. I think that, I know plenty of people who've been beach bums. I think that in my case, I didn't take a year out. I didn't go and travel, go travel around South America or India or somewhere. I actually think that getting a distance from that would have been good for me. I think that doing some form of community service or just something that took me away from my career in a certain way, yanked me off the tracks that I was on. I eventually got off the tracks in my early 30s, but it would have been good to get off in my early 20s. And it seems to me that that's about the age that Warren kind of got off the tracks. But I would even tell you that, and maybe this is the best answer to that is, in so many things, just being aware of the problem is more than half the solution. So if you're aware that you've just come out of a place where you were being judged by an outer scorecard, then, you're already in the position to make the distinction. Once our mind can make the distinction and see that's what's going on, I think we're in a much better place. And I would just tell you as well that, so it's knowing to make that distinction and being around people who already have that distinction, because the more we're around those people, the more we'll see it, basically. And so, I can tell you that, so a big move for me was this move from New York to Zurich. And, I was moving away from all of these. When I talk about negative influences, I'm talking about all sorts of things. But imagine all these hard-charging, ambitious, aggressive hedge fund people, investment banker people, for whom, if I say, I just want to go to the countryside and manage my portfolio and grow slowly or grow with whoever investors find me there, you guys could all imagine how somebody out of New York City would kind of roll their eyes and say, oh, this guy's, he's going to be singing Kumbaya anytime soon. And that goes straight to the core. And it's very hard to get, this idea that our environment trumps our intellect. Simply making the choice to get away from those people. And not that they're not nice people. I mean, many of them remain dear friends of mine. I just have them at a distance. I don't see them as often. And to get around some people who are not doing those kinds of things has helped me to develop my own inner scorecard. So again, it's so fascinating, and I feel such a communion because this is what so many of us do. It's like, I'm going to crack this. I'm going to develop my inner scorecard. And we go into this powerful intellect mode. And we're like, if this is a freaking math problem, I'll crack it. If it's a spreadsheet, I'll have it perfectly analyzed. And and then we get to these things like in a scorecard that it's just not going to work that way. You can't use the brain to act on the brain. You need to go out for a walk. So I think that, and to just we all, I mean, this guy, the concept of flow, I'm not going to say his name. It's Simantelli. I don't know how to pronounce it, but it's he has this idea of flow, and we all know when we've been student and studying something what flow's like. But we need to find flow in our hobbies, and when we know that we have stuff that we love to do, that's where we can develop what gives us true joy, I think. So, and by the way, what I tell you is that, I mean, I'll share with you guys something. So Sting, I saw an interview with Sting, and he looked at the interviewer and he said something. He said, I make music and I play the bass guitar. And he looked at the interview straight in the eye and he said, something that I'm truly excellent at is singing. He said that he knows that he's utterly the best at. And I would tell you guys that, and many of us are the same, we're smart people, we could do many things well. When I was younger, I don't think I'm as good at it now. I knew that the thing that I was absolutely the best at was learning languages. I could pick up languages very quickly and I enjoyed doing it very much. I think I'm a good investor. I don't think I'm as good as Warren Buffett is. And relative to all the things that I can do, investing might not be the best thing for me to do. And as I wrote the book, I realized that it may be that at some point in my life, I wake up and realize that what I need to do is stop being an investor and start being something else. And that's right now, I would say it's a scary thought for me. But look at what happened to Bill Gates. Bill Gates was the CEO of Microsoft. And he's now runs the Gates Foundation, and he did an about turn. And so I think to have the courage, and I hope that if that happens to me, I will have the courage to say, what, investing is not the be all and end all. Actually, what is the be all and end all is, and something that I'm not clear about right now. But so I think we should never sort of forget that. And it's down to this idea that. Yeah, I met Warren Buffett and I realized I'd never be Warren Buffett, and it was actually a very stupid idea to try. And if one day it becomes clear to me that actually I'm a good investor, but really there's some other thing that only I can do in the world and many other people can be good investors, then I hope that I'll have the courage to go and do that. I scratched it. There I was at, sitting in the snake pit of a place, and I'm reading the biography, the Lowenstein biography of Warren Buffett, and I'm like, I want his life, and I've got this life, and how the hell do I get there? And I thought about that. That's how I thought about it, and I was like, and I felt this deep sense of envy of Warren Buffett, and then, what I did was I ordered up the Berkshire annual reports. I ordered up, Cap Cities ABC and Disney, and Geico was still a public company. And I'm reading through those annual reports because I thought that's what Warren Buffett would be doing. In retrospect, what Warren Buffett would have been doing in my shoes? He would have that instant said, ladies and gentlemen, I resign, and left the place. Simple as that. And in retrospect, I regret not having done that, but there were all sorts of reasons why I didn't feel like that was an option for me. And so what I tell you is that even though sort of like that big move to radically change my environment and leave that place was not available to me, I still made progress by, just reading the Berkshire annual report. So I would tell you that, there's a Jewish saying that, our task is not to complete the work, but we must not desist from trying. And I think that rather than saying, if my goal is to climb Everest, rather than saying, how do I get myself on top of Everest, to ask just a simple question, am I moving closer or am I moving further away? And if we're moving closer, we should really, really be happy with that and not feel too bad that we're not in nirvana yet. And those small steps. But I think that, to ask myself, am I standing still or am I moving? Even if I'm moving at a snail's pace, but I know I'm moving closer, then that's a good thing. And that might be, I'm sort of slightly mad and slightly spiritual about it. If every day I've written a new note to somebody that I want a little bit closer in my life, then that's a good thing. So it might be, but so here's the chart that I want to actually put up in one of these classes or presentations, but all I can do is describe it right now. And I want you to imagine a sort of like it's an XY axis, and there's one line which is just a linear line that is angled at about, let's call it 10 degrees. So it's a linear line that for every 10 across, it goes up by 1, and then after 20, it's up by 2. And then we have something that is a quadratic line. It's just squared. So, at 0, it's 0, and it's 1, it's 1. So at 1, it's exactly the same as the linear line. And then at 2, it's vertical 4, and you get the idea. It's going to go asymptotic, or it won't go asymptotic, but it's going to go up a lot faster than the linear line. And at the very early stages, if all you're doing is writing an extra note to somebody, hoping that, out of one of those extra notes, somebody's going to get a little closer to you, it's imperceptible. It's just imperceptible. I mean, nobody sees. You yourself don't see any change in your life. But, over a year, 2, 3, after 5 years, the changes are absolutely extraordinary. And I think that what's interesting is that I've come into your lives now at a point where I've been doing those kinds of things for more than 5 years, perhaps even 10 years. And you're seeing my sort of upward curve start to accelerate away from the linear line. But believe me, I spent the last 10 years doing these imperceptible things. And it's only because I spent the last 10 years doing those imperceptible things that kind of you're seeing all sorts of things now. And I'll just give you some examples. I've been sending goodwill notes out to the world for the last 5, maybe 8 years. And the vast majority of those people have done nothing with those goodwill notes other than to say, oh, that's nice, Guy Spier sent me something else. But this year, I published a book. So I took my whole mailing list, every single person in my database, and I sent all 40,000 of my closest friends an email announcing the book. And possibly if you had 2 email addresses, each one of those things had a book. And I think that there are many people who are like, oh my God, Guy's been sending me cards for the last 5 years. I think I'll just go and buy the book. So, that came back to me in terms of increased sales, for example. But so the answer, and it's a long answer to your question, forgive me, is don't try and put yourself on top of Everest. Just say, am I moving a little bit closer or am I moving a little further away? And so long as I'm moving a little bit closer, just keep doing it, because those things will compound over time. Yeah, I hope that once I've explained to you, you'll agree 100%. So, if I take your question, or the sort of perspective of your question, to its logic conclusion, it's implying that something that the management does in the meeting with us is going to give us a significant insight into how they run the business. And I would put to you that, the probability that there's a correlation there is probably some correlation, but it's not a very good correlation. And given what I said at the very beginning of this, I wouldn't even trust myself to sort of use the impressions that I form of them as an indication of whether they're good managers or not. And I would put to you that there are plenty of people that I could meet who I can't stand in the meeting, or I find that, but are great managers, as well as people that I absolutely love in the meeting who are terrible managers. And I think there's a much easier way to do it. They're engaged in a process, or there's a process So let's take, I need to take well, if we start with a very large business, I think that you could even argue that on some level, the development of the business over relatively short periods of time may be quite independent of the management because so much has been set in place. But if you take the management and the business and you combine them together, it's a complex system. There's interactions between the business and environment, the business with itself, the business and the senior management, and that is evolving in some direction. And as it evolves, it is generating data. And some of that data, just some of it, is captured in the annual reports and in the accounting data, and some of that data may be captured in some other things. What we're really trying to do is measure how is that business evolving? Is it evolving in a way that makes it more valuable over time or less valuable? At what rate is it becoming more valuable? And we have these signals that we can measure. And I would argue that assessing the management face to face is such a biased and bad signal when we've got all these other signals we can look at, and not only the signals generated by the business, we can also look at specific management actions as reflected in the financial report. So rather than meet them and say, are you going to buy back your stock? Why don't we look and see what they did over the last 10 years with respect to stock repurchases? Example with POSCO, I was blown away. I double checked. You know, for a Korean company, and Korean companies don't do a lot of share repurchases, POSCO has regularly retired shares. It's regularly reduced its share count. So, you know, that's in a sense a much better way of evaluating the management and the processes by which the management work. On the other hand, on the negative, POSCO diversified over the last 5 or 10 years. But by the same token, they got a new manager who's saying he's going to divest non-core businesses, which would be great for shareholder value. I'm not sure that I have to meet him in order to know much more. I know that the culture of the company is to retire shares. I don't think that changed with the new manager. I hope he makes good on his promise to divest non-core businesses. And, you know, I would just put to you something else. So people used to ask me, how can you fly around a lot, and how can you keep track of the businesses? And what I'd say is, you know, being on an intercontinental flight, so like 12-hour or longer intercontinental flight, and thinking about the businesses in my portfolio is a great thing to do, because if I'm confident of them sitting in an airplane between 2 continents, that's the kind of thing that I want to own. And there's this idea that, you know, the stock doesn't know that you own it. Just because you're watching the ticker doesn't mean that it's going to move in a particular direction. You switch the stock monitor off, believe me, the business still continues to churn along. There's an interesting thing. If I'm confident with the management without having met them, that's in a way a stronger signal than I'm only confident because I met them. So, and by the way, what I would tell you is, you know, it's not like, I think that what we really have to be clear about is none of these rules are sort of hard and fast, and none of them say, you know, I'm never going to talk to management. I think it's fascinating to talk to management. And by the way, if you talk to management, a great question, you know, you might want to talk to all of your competitors' managements and ask them this question, which is straight from Warren Buffett. You say, which is the business in your industry which you respect the most? Which is the one you respect the least? And if you had a silver bullet, which one would you take out? And so, you know, that's not talking to, you know, instead, if you want to understand Microsoft, talk to Oracle, talk to Google, talk to Apple, talk to IBM, talk to HP, and see what they all say about Microsoft. So, and that's fascinating stuff. I'm not saying not to do it, but what I used to do early on is I'd set up a call with the investor relations people, and they'd basically sit there and pitch the hell out of me. And that was not a smart thing to do. Yeah, so it's a great question. And you know, I had so much to write about that got cut. You know, I'll put you in touch with my editor, and you can and this collaborator William Green, and you can like sort of get upset at them for. So, and here's what, because it's like you're absolutely right. How do you do it? Um, and I think that what we have to do is engage in the golden rule for it. So we have to consistently act in the world as if treat every single person as if they are one of those very special people. And the problem is that we'll come along across a lot of assholes. We'll come across a lot of takers, a lot of matchers, a lot of people who are not the kinds that we want to have around. And we'll have to go through a long sorting process. But if we can stick with it, if we can make sure that we don't become tainted, if we don't lower our standards of behavior, eventually the good will crowd out the bad. So, I think so. So there are maybe it comes down to three things that I would want to practice consistently with every single human that I meet, in the knowledge that most humans will not respond in a particularly great way. So the first thing is, and so this is theoretical because I don't come up to this high standard, but I think that to the extent that one does a little bit, it's even good. So the first thing is, and this is straight out of Adam Grant's book, meet somebody, do something for them. Offer them a bar of chocolate, open the door for them, make an introduction, give them a compliment, help them in some way. It doesn't matter, something. It can be the smallest, most insignificant thing. And then pay attention to how they behave. And, it's a very quick way to figure out the takers will be like, oh, this is cool. This guy's a gravy train. Let's see what else he can do for me. And they'll want to take some more. And those people it's not like we have to get upset and angry. We just kind of put some distance between us, maybe take a few days longer to respond to their emails, maybe not take their calls right away. We don't have to turn them into enemies. We just want them a little further away from us. The same with the matches. If we see somebody who's like, oh my God, that's so generous, they're looking for ways to help you back. You can see that their natural wiring is to be givers. And again, you don't have to jump into their arms and try and get married to them or anything, but you just know that you want them a little bit closer. So you want to respond to their emails a little bit faster. You want to be so that's the first thing. So there are probably faster and better ways to sort between the takers, the matchers, and the givers. But that is one very effective way. And I would say that what we're looking to do is we're not going to set this up in a day. We're actually looking to this is going to be a process of sorting that goes on for the whole of our lives. So, we need to start now and we need to stick with the program and not even expect any results that we can measure for at least the first 5 years. So then the next thing is we want people to trust us. And I think that one of the most important ways in which we get people to trust us, in addition to sort of like, meaning what we say and saying what we mean, but this is something that I didn't get for a long time is, and I'm stating this as a goal, I don't think I do it all the time, even though I'm a lot better at it, is I want to treat every single piece of information, insight, disclosure that any individual gives to me as confidential unless there's explicit or clear permission to share. So, and that's just a rule. It doesn't matter what they do. It doesn't matter how they behave towards me or the rest of the world. I'm just going to set that as a standard for myself without trying to talk to the world about it. And I think that what I've seen is that as I started to do that, people started to trust me more and people started to disclose more to me. And that disclosure is a learning opportunity. And the fact that I don't share it, actually, I don't lose that much. So again, I think that then people who are willing to disclose, people who are looking to share stuff that they don't want to share with the planet, suddenly find that they're calling Guy Spier up more. And that kind of enhances the environment as well. And then the third thing is, I have this goal that I will never tell anybody what to do. All I ever want to do is share my own experiences. And there was an example in the book. I didn't want to give any advice in the book. I wanted to tell the reader, this is what I did. This is mistakes that I made. This is what I learned, and let other people learn from my experience. And there's this idea which is expressed. There's one of the books I've written up there is in the back is by Muhammad Fatalbab. It's about forum, and he talks about how every time you give advice, you're actually potentially doing damage. And here's the idea. So I give Arvind some advice of some kind or other, and we can do a 4x4 matrix. I say buy the house. It's buy the house or don't buy the house. And if he buys the house, it can either work out or not. And if he doesn't buy the house, it can work out or not. So let's say I tell Arvind to buy the house. Now he buys the house and it works out. Now I'm all big egotist going to say, see, Arvind, I told you so, and it worked out. I tell him to buy the house and it doesn't work out. And Arvind is like, it's because of you that I bought the house, and now it hasn't worked out, and I'm going to blame you about it. On the other side, I don't buy that. I tell him not to buy the house. He buys it and it works out. He says, you gave me bad advice and I went and did it. So you can see that giving people advice is a kind of a projection. We're sort of like it's an arrogance to think that we know what we would do in their shoes, because they're in a different place in their lives. They're different people. There's no way we can judge it. But if I tell Arvind a story, if I say to Arvind, I bought a house, and this is a true story. I bought a weekend home. I didn't consult my wife about it. She was enthusiastic to go for the first 3 years, but it turned out that it was too big for us, and it was a little further out from the city than we liked. And 5 years later, we ended up selling it at a massive loss, and it was an albatross around our necks, and we wish we'd never bought it. And one of the things that I've learned is that if I do buy a house, I absolutely want my wife to be 100% on board with me, which she wasn't. Now I'm telling you a story that you can decide if it applies to you or not. And I think that what I found is that when I tell stories like that, people imperceptibly lean forwards and they're kind of interested, and they love the fact that I'm not telling them what to do. People hate being told what to do. And so those three things, selecting forgivers and sort of getting further away from matchers and takers, keeping stuff confidential, and never telling people what to do, I think they're very subtle changes in attitude. Nobody's going to look at you and say, oh my God, you dyed your hair green today. Nobody's going to say, oh, you're acting very different today. But if we can do it consistently, no results in the first 5 years, but suddenly you'll be around better people. And no easy fixes. But I would tell you that stuff is so exciting for me, because it's kind of a path to a better life that is kind of so subtle, and it's just available to those of us who are able to see the subtlety and who are able to consistently do it. So and I would tell you that when I first bought that book, it was around 2003, I think, in New York. And my motivation for buying it was, I'm going to totally master this shit. I'm going to get this, and I'm going to apply all of it. So, I would tell you that if those of you who haven't gone, the Berkshire Hathaway meeting is such a wonderful place to get around those kinds of people. And I would tell you by contrast that, Arvind knows that I'm on the Harvard Business School alumni board, and Harvard Business School has its fair share of aggressive people, and people who maybe would take a page or two out of that 48 Laws of Power. And I think that if you would have had me 10 years ago, I would have been like, yeah, well, that's how you have to behave in order to be successful. And the truth is, you can get a very high degree of success by doing that. And, there are plenty of investment bankers who build fortunes by doing that. So I think it's about getting around people who are not like that and figuring out what environments don't have those values, because I need to go into those environments so I can strengthen, or what environments have the values that I care about, and I need to get into those environments so that I can strengthen them. And for me, the first stop was the Berkshire Hathaway meeting, and people that I met through that. And again, it was imperceptible at first, but I would say so. The Berkshire Hathaway meeting, I think, is a very pure form of it. That said, there are 40,000 people at the meeting. I think Warren Buffett's inner circle is unbelievably pure. That's an incredible group of people. And in the book, I describe this chance meeting with Keogh. I don't remember, is it Don Keogh? I think it is. And it really was a really powerful meeting. It struck me, and that happened at the Berkshire meeting. I was at Borsheim's, and it was a chance conversation with Don Keogh. And another chance conversation that I had was with this guy called Jack Byrne, who used to be the CEO of Geico, and then later he became the CEO of a company called White Mountains Insurance. So I think that it's only when we get around the right people that we start being able to make these distinctions. And so in a certain way, but just to give you a sense, I'm very bummed because the TED conference is about to begin in Rio de Janeiro, and I would have loved to have gone, but I can't. And my conscious choice in going to the TED conference is about getting around people who are creative, people who are a little bit more idealistic, people. So, there are values that are not some of the values that we've been talking about here, but I'm saying I want to get a little bit more of that into me, my personality, my life. I want to accentuate that. So I think that it's a tool not just to make you more Buffettesque, but you can sort of direct yourself in a certain way to how you want to become. And, and then, I did this Google talk. So I have to tell you all, the engineer, the Sarab Madan, who invited me, was such a lovely guy. And he has this wonderful friend, Rishi. And, I breathed in the air of the Google campus, and I just felt this sense of, it was very funny. So there are these engineers on the campus who are just dreaming of being value investors and living my life. And I'm thinking, my God, your life's pretty good. I want your life. And so I've kind of been thinking, how do I get a little bit more of that Google atmosphere into my life? And what can I do? What meetings can I attend, or what? So I think that it's a tool for driving us, if you like. And maybe some of the values that I've worked so hard to get into my life are a little unbalanced, maybe. I mean, maybe just having these Buffettesque values are not the only values. There are other values, entrepreneurialism maybe, or creativity, that are not as present in my life and in my thinking as they should be. So, but sorry, just this basic idea, if environment trumps intellect, and we become like the people that we hang out with, then picking who we hang out with becomes destiny, and we just have to pick what it is. And the Berkshire Hathaway meeting is very good for me, but I think that it should be balanced by some other things. And I think that for different people, it might be other environments. For some people, it might be joining a religious group, it might be joining the church, or it might be, becoming a member of the Catholic Church and becoming a bishop. And you can impact huge numbers of lives that way. So, there's somebody that I know who did this. So there's a pilgrimage that many people do to Santiago de Compostela. I never heard of this place. It's somewhere in the north of Spain. And there are pilgrims who come all over the world, and they walk across this very beautiful landscape, and they meet other pilgrims. So, I'm going to participate in one of those next year, and it's getting around, slightly more spiritual people, but it's fascinating to me that is destiny if we think about it that way. So the biggest challenges, I think that the financial crisis was a huge challenge for me. It was actually, I would tell you that one of the worst moments of my life was when I met, I had heard that somebody who was an acquaintance of mine and a very good friend of a friend of mine had lost her son. sort of a teenage son had died overnight. And I was there the next day, and I have never looked into somebody who was more terrified. The terror that I saw in her eyes was just remains with me still. So the financial crisis for me was nowhere near as bad as that, but it was the most terrified for. I felt terrified, and so that was very difficult for me. And as you know, I kind of hung out reading about Shackleton and reading Marcus Aurelius and Seneca, and those Stoic philosophers really helped me. And on some level, I kind of did use my intellect to say, in a certain way, stop being so scared. It's only money. It's not your life. It's not your health. It's not all of those other things. But I was utterly terrified that the whole of my family's fortune, whole of my family's wealth would go up in smoke, particularly around the Bear Stearns bankruptcy or potential bankruptcy, and then purchased by J.P. Morgan. I think that this decision to go and work for D.H. Blair was a terrible failure on my part, and dealing with the degree to which I had fallen, and the degree to which my reputation had suffered as a result of going there, was also just not a happy moment for me, yeah, I just didn't like that feeling very much. I mean, the good news is that I was younger, but it was a horrible feeling. I mean, I just remember people looking at me, and I'm certain that what they were doing, I mean, they never would have admitted it, but they're just looking and saying, you think I'm ever going to hire you? You think I'm ever even going to work with you after you worked at D.H. Blair? I'm not going to be tainted by that garbage. And I did. I felt like a bit of a leper. So, and there's I think that this sort of the envy that I felt for these so on. I don't know how well you guys know New York City, but there is still a building. I think it's 712 Fifth Avenue. So there are a number of people that I would visit from time to time, classmates of mine in 712 Fifth Avenue, and that building is designed to make the people who work in it feel like they're masters of the universe. It really is a very beautiful building. Another building, if you guys have visited, is 9 West 57th Street. It's a building that just oozes and exudes this sense of money is so irrelevant to us because we've got more money than God, and we've got these spectacular views over Central Park. And there are these subtle signals that say, we're not worried about space, even though we're in the most expensive real estate in New York City. And I was envious of the people sitting in those offices. I wanted to be in those offices. And and I could probably come up with many more. I think that here's what's really fascinating is that, and I'm not sure if I'm going to say this right, and I know that somebody whose name I can't remember has said this much better than me. The degree of success that you will have in your lives and that I will have in my life is not related to how hard I work, or it's related to how high a degree of failure I'm willing to tolerate in my life. And so if I'm only willing to tolerate a very small amount of failure, I'm going to keep taking relatively safe things that have relatively limited downside, but will also, because that's the nature of things, when don't have a lot of upside. So the guy who lunges for a career in law, or career as a consultant, or career as all these careers where the sort of the outcomes are relatively narrow. You start with a relatively high salary, but where it pans out 10 to 15 or 20 years later is a slightly higher salary or a partnership salary, but it's not sort of many, many multiples of what you could expect to get. That's somebody who doesn't want to tolerate a very high degree of failure in their lives. And then you get people like Ted Turner, who spent vast amounts of money, of his own and other people's money, building up cable news network, the first news network that was nationwide, that was on cable, that wasn't one of the broadcast networks at the time, and he was willing to invest 5, 6, 7 years of his life into something that might ultimately fail. So he was, and I suspect that if we look closely, and I'm afraid I don't know this, if we look closely at his life, we'd probably find a lot of major, massive failures. And another guy that we can talk about is that we all know a little bit better is Steve Jobs. I mean, he was fired from his own company. He spent a number of years out in the wilderness. So my life, in a certain way, when you look at the failures in my life, they just don't compare to some of the bigger failures that other people who are way more successful than me that have had. Today, I was reading about Freddie and Fannie. It turns out that they've had some major judgment. These guys who invested in whichever securities, Bill Ackman is one, and this guy, Bruce Berkowitz is another, and one or two others are all losing large amounts of money because they made major bets on Freddie and Fannie. And it turns out, at least in the latest decision, that it's unlikely that they're going to win. And so they're tolerating major failure. Bill Ackman lost on his Freddie and Fannie position $175 million, according to the Wall Street Journal today. And he's a guy who's willing to fail big because he's got the fortitude and the courage and the moral or the depth of personality to take that, because he knows that over time he'll do extraordinarily well. He's a guy who in a certain way lives much larger than I do. I think if I'd been willing to fail as big as he has done, I would have had an awful lot more success financially and career-wise today. So I hope I haven't digressed. Yeah, I mean, it's very simple. I mean, I made the decision on the wrong criterion. I was at a point in my life where it was clear to me that I didn't want to just go and get another brand on my resume. And yes, I was an arrogant son of a bitch, and I was an arrogant and greedy son of a bitch. But I think that the reasoning, if you separate that out, the reasoning that says, you know what, I've worked at this well-known, it wasn't McKinsey, but it was Braxton Associates, was a well-known, very respected consulting firm. I had Oxford and Harvard on my resume. I think that the reasoning that said, I don't want to go to another sort of brand name firm was an understandable thing to do. But having decided to get off that set of railway tracks, I just lunged for the guy who offered me the biggest upside without taking any other considerations into account. And I think that probably the better thing to do would have been to just apply what Warren Buffett has said so many times, is to find somebody that I truly love, respect, and admire. And if you would have asked me at the time, do you love, respect, and admire the head of the firm that you're going to work with, I think that I probably wouldn't have. So I made the decision based on what was most likely to give me a great upside over the ensuing 2 or 3 years. And I had this idea, I had these words ringing around my head that the chairman of the firm said, you'll be working directly with me, you'll bringing deals in, and you'll get a piece of the deals that you do. And those were just magic words for me, because I knew that there was upside in that. And so I was playing straight into my greed, rather than to say, do I admire, like, and trust the person? And is he a guy that I really want to sort of, spend all that time around and become like him? I had this idea that I would go and make a ton of money, but not become like the people I was working with. So I just made the decision on the wrong criterion. So so with difficulty, it was very difficult for me to do that. And what I'm realizing now, and I don't think I've written about this, even in the stuff that didn't get included, is that in the same way that sometimes we need to let our instincts bubble up. Sometimes it's good to clamp down with our rational brain. And so in a certain way, one of the places I took refuge is that, I didn't feel this emotionally. Emotionally, I was feeling horrible and my stomach was churning. But rationally, I knew from all the stuff that I'd read that this was a kind of a panic, and that this was a rush of the herd in one particular direction, and that it was extremely unlikely that things would be as bad as they felt emotionally. So actually to retreat into my rational neocortex and to say, how likely is it when the whole herd is running that is actually as bad as all of this? So that was one thing. The other thing was, to keep asking myself, what do I own, and how is it affected by what's going on right now? And, for a certain period of time before the financial crisis, I owned shares of McDonald's, and I'd go and eat at McDonald's, and I got quite a bit fatter by eating at McDonald's. But it was such a great feeling to go there and know that I own shares, and to see all these people walking in and eating McDonald's. And I think that, it's a smart thing to do, to have investments where I know that even if things go bad and I'm feeling uncomfortable, there are ways in which I can reassure myself. So consumer goods are always a great thing to do, because you can go and watch consumers buying the products, and you can see them stacked on the shelves, and you can ask housewives about them. So that's all a good thing. So I think that really sort of, consciously telling myself, all right, what businesses do I own? I think another thing that was extremely difficult for me was that I was plugged into this high cost base with this expensive office that was costing me $250,000 a year in rent, which is much more than I wanted to be spending in rent. And to start looking at ways in which I could cut my costs to make sure that I could survive. And having that high rent was not a great thing. And I actually had an out in that the lease that I had signed was not it was a non-recourse lease. And so there's something called a good guy clause, which said that if I wanted to, I could walk away from the lease provided I vacated the property. And it was a consideration that I had. As it turned out, in March 2009, things turned around, things came back, and I decided that I wouldn't do that, even though I'd left Zurich by then. I would say that I had the things that made it extra hard for me was that I had some key investors who redeemed. I was in an office building that was full of fearful people, and New York was full of fearful people. I had a fund structure which allowed people to redeem. All of those things made it enormously more difficult for me to buy things that were cheap. But I had an intellectual understanding of why it was so hard for me. And there were the things that I bought, I threw up over every share that I bought. But on some level, I wanted to be able to look back on that period and know that I had been buying stocks. I think that if I had gone through that period without buying anything, even though I bought a lot less than I would have liked to, I would have been disgusted with myself. So I'm glad at least I did that. Did I ever think, just to address the last part of your question, that the world had fundamentally changed? Although I think that, if you study the crisis, the stock market crash of the 1930s, the government or the Federal Reserve had a very, very restrictive monetary policy. They were keeping they kept money very, very tight. They thought that was the right thing to do. And cash was just not available in the economy. It had a terrible deleterious effect. I think that they're not going to admit it, and I haven't yet read Tim Geithner's book or Hank Paulson's book, but I'm pretty sure that if they could do it again, they wouldn't have allowed Lehman Brothers to go under. Having the credit markets freeze up the way they did is not something that anybody wants to voluntarily do. But I think that, we cannot underestimate, or I fully understood that we had Ben Bernanke. Ben Bernanke was a student of the stock market crash of the 1929, And he understood, and it was just this simple thing that when the public demand liquidity, you have to make it available to them. And he was making liquidity available in just extraordinary amounts. I mean, the balance sheet of the Federal Reserve expanded by, I don't remember the exact number, but I think that it expanded 5 or 6-fold. I think, if I'm not mistaken, it expanded from, and I may have these numbers completely wrong, from $1 trillion to $6 trillion. I'm not sure that I have those numbers exactly right, but you know, the awesome power, the Federal Reserve can just create money at the stroke of a pen or at the flick of a switch or the type of a keyboard, and pumping that massive liquidity was just a huge deal. And so I think that when I saw him doing that, I felt quite confident that, you know, we weren't going to go into the 1930s depression or something like that. Depending on one leg. Here's what I would tell you. So you know, there I am, and I invest a significant portion of my life in these goodwill generating activities. And you know, so when I started doing that, my staff thought I was nuts. In fact, they felt like they were protecting me, so they said, we're not going to do this, we think it's silly, it's a total waste of money, what's the point? And you know, so they didn't believe it would bring me anything. And at some point, I figured out that the best strategy was to sit them down. And I've had this conversation with at least 3 people that I can recall to mind, and probably more, where I sat down with them, you know, one-on-one at a table, looked at them and said, look, we're going to do this. You think I'm mad. You know what? I am a little bit crazy, but you know, it's my business, and so we're going to do it. Can I show you that there's going to be a return? No, I can't. And you know what? On some level, I don't care. We are just going to do this. We're going to send out these Hare Krishna flowers. We're going to send out, you know, a whole ton of Christmas cards. I'm going to spend for the month of November, the whole month signing Christmas cards. I'm going to send, you know, so the kind of thing would happen is, and I still do this. I mean, I have a stack from my last trip of like 30 or 40 business cards I have to write to every single person, and I haven't yet done it. And I'm about to go away. So there's a place in my desk where I keep them. Eventually, they'll get something. And, you know, then the card comes up of the person who sold me flowers in the street, or the card of the driver who drove me somewhere. And I'll get the assistant who says, are you really going to send a card to the guy who sold you flowers in the street? And I'm like, yes. You know, so the rest of the world does not believe that stuff works. And if you're in a marketing department of some business, you know, you have to show return within a year or 2 on your activities. And I don't care if the return doesn't come to year 5, 6, 7, 8, or 9. So I would argue that I have found a whole bunch of things to do which take time, effort, money, resources, that at least the people around me and much of humanity think are completely useless and are not a smart use of anybody's time or resources. And I actually think are a big part of why I've made any progress in my life. And it's all about this Adam Grant give and take, generating goodwill, random acts of kindness, you know, sending the letter to sending the thank you note to the guy who sold me flowers, or to the air hostess who helped me, or and most of the world thinks that, and the number of times I've heard people say, well, that's a complete waste of time. To the degree that it was part of the motivation for writing the book. People are like, oh yeah, you went to Harvard Business School, of course you've achieved a certain amount of success. I'm like, no, it's because I was writing thank yous. Yeah, no, whatever. You know, and so then I felt like I had to write a book about it to tell them. I mean, I think now's, you know, write thank you notes. And actually these days, I've been getting so much love for this book, and it's been so rewarding for me. But there's a lot of stuff that's happening in the book. I would even say that it's a slight distraction for me. But so specifically, these last couple of weeks are not ideal. But so every company that I look at that I think is half interesting, I go and buy one share of that company in my Charles Schwab account, and I've got my Charles Schwab account set up so that I get the physical reports. So especially around annual report season, that's kind of died down now. I'm getting a stream of annual reports and 10Ks and Qs, and I find reading those are coming in every day, absolutely fascinating. I decided, and it's part of getting around the right people, I decided some time ago that I would have a subscription to the American Banker. It's a great publication if you're interested in the banking industry. And so, I'll have a copy of the American Banker that I read. I tell you, I've been reading it every day that I've been in the office for the last 5 years. I don't think it's been generating any good ideas for me. I have subscriptions to, Wall Street Journal, Grant's Interest Rate Observer, Barron's, The Economist, Oil and Gas Journal, Advertising Age, and all of those are in the office. They sit to the right of my desk. I'm grabbing a pile of them and I'm reading them. But then, that's kind of like backdrop. I'm reading earnings releases and 10Ks and Qs of companies that are in the portfolio as they come through. But all of that is not so all of those things are just happening all the time. Every now and then I'll run a screen. I ran a screen just now while I was waiting for you guys, but it didn't have much to do with investing. I mean, not a lot. I was comparing Boston to Zurich, and I was thinking, what is the structure of the financial industry in Zurich, and what's the structure of the financial industry in Boston? And in case you didn't know, the largest balance sheet of a bank that's domiciled in Boston is State Street Bank with $250 billion. But so I was looking at that. I was running a screen. I actually also have Value Line that comes in. So I would tell you that a year ago, whenever Modi was elected, and actually a little before, somebody had emailed me and told me about some great Indian banks that I was interested in investing in. And I've been working since then to get myself set up to invest in India. And believe it or not, I'm still not set up to invest in India. So, I've got things that I would probably buy in India right now, but I just can't do it because I don't have the account set up. So I don't know if that gives you a sense. And there was something else I was going to sort of bring up to you. So then I would tell you that I think that, there's a guy that presented at the Value Investing Congress. He's a very smart, wonderful guy whom I met through Monash. His name's Amitabh Singhi. He runs money in India. He gave 4 great ideas at the Value Investing Congress, very interesting ideas of companies to invest in India. So it's, ordering up those annual reports and looking at them, but also making sure that I have a really good relationship with him and finding ways to help him. So I want him to raise money in the United States. So I'm finding places for him to speak. And so, and I guess how I'm allocating my time between all of those things. But then I'll tell you what happens. I mean, so a couple of things. I was very interested in the global education industry. At the time, I had an analyst. We'd found a company in the Philippines. I sent him out to look at the company. He came back and he said, look, that company, they're really terrible at allocating capital. Yes, it's cheap, but then now they're going to go and build some gyms and they're going to keep investing money in things that will never earn a return. It looks profitable, but it's just not a great investment. But check out this powdered milk company, which has got 80% market share. And then within 2 weeks, I was buying shares of this powdered milk company. When Warren Buffett made his investment in Bank of America and the preferred shares of Bank of America, light went on in my head. I realized Federal Reserve is not going to allow any of these money center banks to go under. And within 3 days, I was buying warrants of Bank of America, even though I'd been doing no research on money center banks. I mean, I'd read up on them and I'd seen the reports. So there's this basal level of activity, which is general curiosity about the world, but then the actual ideas come from left field that can be completely unrelated to what I've been researching. And so there's these, it's almost like these whiplash moments where you realize that you were looking in the wrong direction. And here it is staring you in the face. But when it stares at you in the face, it's just like sort of black and white. It's just very obvious that and just to give the Bank of America example, I think that when I invested in Bank of America, it had a $40 billion market cap. It had a balance sheet of $2 trillion. And you just say to yourself, you look at any bank over history, the majority of them earn around 1% on assets. 1% on assets is $20 billion, and you got Bank of America with a $40 billion market cap. And then you start asking yourself, well, what happens if inflation gets going? And what is the Fed doing to their cost of funding? And you realize that every single thing points in a positive direction, other than they're kind of going through these sort of like paying off all the people who say that they contributed to the financial crisis. So you've got litigation and in the short term, but that once they get through the whole massive litigation, their earnings power is going to be intact. And so literally 2 or 3 days after I saw that investment by Warren Buffett, I was like, I'm buying these. I bought the common, and I bought these warrants. So maybe here's the idea. If I don't know how to fly an airplane, but I took lessons all the way up to flying circuits. And the key skill about landing an airplane is a very simple thing that one has to learn. So you're flying the plane down, and at the last minute, or just as the plane comes to a certain distance from the ground, you need to flare the plane and basically fly it straight and level while taking the power off the engine, and the airplane kind of gently floats onto the runway. And so the key question is when you flare the plane, when you turn from flying down and descending to flying straight and level. If you do it too early, then you're going to have a rough landing. If you do it too late, you're going to have a rough landing. So you want to get the time just right. You need to know, and you need to do it at the right distance from the ground. So the natural thing that an inexperienced pilot does, or somebody who hasn't been taught, is you want to look out the window and look for the ground. And the problem is that when you do that, you can't fly the plane straight and level. Somebody who looks out and looks for the ground with the focus of their eyesight is going to fly the plane badly, and you're going to have a really nasty landing and even crash the plane. So what they teach you is this idea of peripheral vision. You have to fly the plane straight and level, keep your eyes on the horizon, and look for the ground rising up. And you learn to judge, and you never actually look at the ground directly. You just detect it in your peripheral vision. And I think that for me, that's a powerful analogy for flying. We are surveying our environment. We're constantly working on improving our environment. There are investor newsletters coming in. There's annual reports coming in. There's 10Ks and Qs coming in. There's people's presentations. There's a value line, and we're looking at all of that stuff, and we're taking in information about the world. But at the same time, we're looking for those sort of unusual signals that say something interesting is going on. And those unusual signals could come from anywhere, so we're not kind of trying to focus on them directly. We're trying to detect them coming in on our peripheral vision. And as we detect them, then we need to focus. So the preferred investment by Warren Buffett, that was one of those things coming in on the peripheral vision. The thing this is really just long term. I'm reading, and I'm very behind on my reading. I'm reading the book about the guys from 3G Capital, the company it's not the company that acquired InBev, that they acquired Heinz, and they're now doing Burger King. I've forgotten their names. But, I don't know that story very well, and I want to know it much better. And, I think that once I'm done reading it, I'm going to ask myself, what other management teams are doing that? Can I identify them? What would they look like? And see if I can identify them. And so I think that would be a fun search to go after. I mean, first of all, there's differences between Charlie Munger and Warren Buffett, let alone between one of those and me. So I'll just point out to you some important differences I think that there exist between Charlie Munger and Warren Buffett. So, Warren Buffett didn't start with his charitable program until really quite late in life, when he started giving money to the Gates Foundation and to his children. Charlie Munger's been charitable, I think, from a much earlier stage, and has taken substantial parts of his time to do things like be a director of a hospital and design wings of schools. And
Right.
So Charlie Munger has taken regular summers and kind of switches off from the world and just reads a large number of books and hangs out with his family on a family estate out in Minnesota. To my knowledge, Warren does a lot less of that. Warren really just loves to read up on investments primarily. I think Charlie Munger has a much broader range of reading, and I don't know this for certain, but I have a suspicion that Warren only reads the books that Charlie tells him to read. So Warren is happy for Charlie to read the books, and then when Charlie thinks that it's one that's interesting for Warren, he'll say, Warren, read that book. So, what's interesting is that one is, Charlie is a centrist Republican and Warren is a centrist Democrat. So they even have different politics and support different political parties, which I think is interesting, telling, and special about that partnership. They don't have the same political views. So then if I come to myself, I mean, I'm younger than them. I still like sports. I'm realizing that as I grow older, I may like sports less and less because I'm less good at them and my body becomes more brittle. But I like the fresh air. Warren Buffett's office has blinds drawn. I don't want to sit in an office with blinds drawn. I want to be able to look out at a view. I love looking at trees or mountains or a river or something, a lawn, a garden, a bed of flowers. I care about that. I think I spend a lot of time in the United States, but I like having wine with dinner, and I like drinking wine. I don't want to drink Diet Coke the whole time, although I do drink quite a lot of Diet Coke. And I like a lot of the food that Warren Buffett hates. I do like some of that European, sort of like what he just wants is either a burger with fries or he wants a steak. Now, there are all sorts of dishes here in Europe, not to mention places like India and Mexico or Israel and the Middle East and China that I love. And we know that Warren Buffett, when he goes to China, he brings his own steaks and hamburgers with him, or he needs to know that he can eat that food because that's all he wants to eat. So, on the, I'm not saying this just to be self-deprecating or to be sort of humble for the sake of being humble. He's way, way smarter than I am. He's just got a brain that works at a higher clock speed. I just have to accept that. I don't like accepting it. It's true. I'd love to have the extra IQ points. But, maybe if I had the extra IQ points, I'd be a paraplegic or something. So like Stephen Hawking. So be grateful for what you've got. He's a typical and classic Midwesterner. I think that people have said that he was asked at a meeting that he has a kind of a Norman Rockwell approach to Berkshire Hathaway and sort of view. So I don't know if any of you know Norman Rockwell. He's a painter who paints these sort of classic, what is it, mother and apple pie type scenes from the Midwest with these kind of solid, sort of not necessarily beautiful, but the kinds of people you'd want to rely on for stuff. And so, many of the businesses are these kind of very solid middle America, not extraordinarily exciting, paint company, building company, direct insurance company. And it's a reflection of his very, very Midwestern outlook. He's a very sophisticated guy, but he's also a Midwestern guy. I'm not a Midwestern guy. I'm not even really American. I'm maybe even more European, and that gives a whole different set of things going on in my life that are not going on in his life. And it comes down to, when we met him, I'd sent a biography of me and of Laurie, my wife. And Laurie, my wife, was born in Salisbury, North Carolina, which is where Warren Buffett had some very good friends. And so, and I'd written up, I grew up in Israel, Iran, South Africa, and the UK, and I'd written that up in my bio for him. And, Warren meets me and Laurie, and he looks at me, and then he turns to Laurie and he says, "Oh, you were born in Salisbury. I know that town well." And, what was interesting to him was a place that was familiar to him. I thought he'd be impressed with my exoticism, and he had no freaking interest. So the night before, I at the time had this sort of convertible Porsche in New York City, and the night before I drove Monish and his two daughters and myself around on a tour of New York City, and we ended up and so Monish kind of bantered with Warren that I'd been driving him around in this ridiculous Porsche. That flew straight over. It flew straight over or through. I don't know if he would recognize a Porsche if you hit him over the head with one. He's different in that way. I mean, I think so. Let's. I'm going to use a phrase that I hate, but I'm going to use it. Let's unpack that, and I think it's a fascinating place to unpack. So, let's start with the analysis that Nick Sleep, who, if I understand correctly, is closing down his fund, has given of Amazon. So, what he would claim with Amazon is that Amazon could have much higher profit margins if they wanted to. But they choose not to, because every time they sell us this stuff at these ridiculously low prices, they're creating goodwill with us, and it makes us have warm, positive feelings towards Amazon. And over time, as those warm, positive feelings increase and get reinforced, then we're going to just go to Amazon for all sorts of things that we don't go to today. And that's, he would argue, a very real asset on Amazon's balance sheet, the goodwill of the customers for Amazon. So, he would make the same analysis of Costco for the same reason. Then we look at, I'll just throw a couple of examples which I know less well. I can take so Aflac. I used to have an investment in Aflac, and Aflac does an awful lot of good things in the communities that they operate in. They often build hospitals. Over and above their cancer insurance, they want to be a very, very positive contributor to the communities that they're in. McDonald's builds these Ronald McDonald's houses that take care of, I can't remember in McDonald's cases. So they are clearly improving the brand and improving the goodwill that society has towards them by being great corporate citizens. And I think that when you have the kind of profitability that companies like McDonald's and Aflac have, to name those two examples, it's just a smart thing to do. It's smart to want to have the community feel all this positive goodwill to you. I think that it becomes really hard to justify many of those investments on an ROI to the business, which is why they tend to get sort of put off into this sort of, as you put, corporate social responsibility setting. And if we just go to a third one, Goldman Sachs has been doing all this stuff on women, 10,000 women, entrepreneurship, and again, it's the same idea. So I think smart businesses do that kind of stuff. There's a limit to how much they can do it, because they could totally trash their profitability if they did it in really, really massive scale. But it's a good thing to do. And I'd say on the other side that I try to avoid businesses that are net social, that there's an aspect to their business which is a net social cost. So, lottery companies contribute to inequality, income inequality, and so there's a social cost to income inequality that those companies aren't bearing. And so I think that we should either not invest in them, which is I think where I come from, or we want to kind of see those businesses as slightly less profitable because they're not accounting for everything on their income statement. And of course, the better example and well-known example is tobacco companies, where perhaps now with the attorney's general settlement and all of the taxes that they pay, they're covering their costs. But before that, they looked very profitable, but they weren't paying the cost of their of all the cancer that they were causing. So the answer in general is yes. So, I'm very interested in investing. I can't find a job. I leave DH Blair, and I have. So look, and I write about it in the book. So when as my family moved to the UK, we'd been living in Iran, where my father had worked for a multinational chemicals company. We moved to the UK in 1977, and my father starts a business which proceeds to grow and has some very profitable years in the intervening years. I leave DH Blair, and I know that I have the option, if I want to show up in London and say to my father, hey, I'd like to work in this business. And he actually thought that that would be a great idea. But I'm still really interested in investing, and I'd love to get a job in investing. So I described going to Tweedy Brown and to Ruane Cunniff, and I interviewed for a job as a telecoms analyst with Sanford Bernstein, and they very nearly offered me the job, but I think they just didn't want to take the risk with a guy who had the pedigree that I had at that point. A friend of mine was on the Credit Suisse First Boston issuance desk, so I also interviewed there, and I even interviewed a little bit with Goldman Sachs, and these were all through personal relationships and connections. And none of those things were coming up. So then I get this call from my father, and he says, look, why don't you manage this money? So I'm scared, but I start managing it. And I took over a portfolio of laddered bonds, and so I just start managing. That's around 1995. And my decision is that as the bonds come due, I'm going to try and find good equity investments for them. And I tell myself, he's just taken the money that he's made and he's been putting it into fixed income. If I can just convert him into equities, that's going to be a good thing. I think the first investment that I made was in Duff and Phelps that I was talking about at the beginning of this. And I'm going around. There's a directory run that's by a guy called Antoine Bernheim, which is an offshore funds directory. And I go and I meet a guy called Alex Ropers, and I talk to him a little bit about investing. And I go and meet a guy called Bill Strong, who came out of Ruane Cunniff. And so I'm meeting people, and I'm investing some of my dad's money. 6 months later, more money comes. And I kind of figure out during that period that I want to set up a fund. So I start talking to lawyers, and he's kind of raising money from me in a certain way. He's telling people, hey, my son's doing this. This is good. You guys should come join in. And all the way until 1995 to 1997, I'm just managing these as separate accounts and effectively taking responsibility. And, these are all people who are used to Swiss bankers, and the only thing that they knew was to buy bonds. And then I was suddenly talking to them intelligently about custodial fees, trading costs. I'd spent now a couple of years in an investment bank. There were all sorts of things that I knew, and I knew an awful lot more than some of the Swiss bankers who were speaking to my father and his set of friends. And so they realized that I knew a little bit about what I was talking about. And so by the time I actually started Aquamarine Fund, I had 15 million. And, I was buying at that point. I wasn't consciously doing it, but I was trying to reverse engineer what other people were doing. So I was looking at what Bill Strong was doing. I was looking at what Alex Ropers was doing. I looked for the shares. I acquired that one share of Tweedy Brown and started attending their meetings. I was very fascinated by Tom Russo. I think he's a brilliant and wonderful and smart guy. And I started learning about Nestle and other branded goods companies. And I think that in retrospect, I think maybe all I was doing, so what is that a long way of saying? I was just sort of like asking myself, am I getting closer to Everest or further away? And that was really what was guiding me. And, oh, Duff and Phelps, that looks like if I buy it, I'll get myself close to Everest, I'll buy some. This guy, Bill Strong, he's really smart, and he used to work at Ruane Cunniff. I'm going to try and spend some time with him. So that was getting me a little bit closer, and there wasn't some kind of overarching logic or coherence to what I was doing. Just to go back to that last question, I think that maybe the key point to put across to you is that, even though I tried to write about the messiness of it, it probably still looks a lot cleaner because of you still want to write an interesting book and you want to write a really readable book. But I think that a really important point to get across to you is if your life feels messy, if you feel like there isn't some overarching plan, if you feel like you can't tie the threads together and you can't see the logic, then that is the way most of my life has been. So it's only in retrospect that we see the logic. And so if you feel like you're walking through treacle and you feel like it just doesn't make any sense, and you feel like I'm torn between wanting to do this and wanting to do that, that is completely and utterly a part of the process. And I think that just, I don't know what I could do to give you the confidence to know that even though you're walking through treacle, even though it's freaking confusing, even though the signals are not clear, even though you don't have any clarity, if in all of that mess that is the daily content of our lives, you just do one thing consistently that brings you a little bit in one direction that you think is a good direction, even though you don't even know what that direction is. You're saying, well, I know that guy's a good person, so I'm going to respond to his call a little bit sooner. That's what it feels like, just that you know. And I would tell you right now, just to tell you with my portfolio, I don't feel like there's much that's cheap. I don't want to take anything out of stocks because I don't think that holding cash is any better. I haven't seen a great investment idea for some time. I don't know when I'll see one. I feel like, there's all this excitement and hoopla about this book, which is on the one hand great fun, but on the other hand is not my core mission, which is to invest my investors' money. I'm a little concerned that I may be getting too caught up in that. And I don't know where the next idea is going to come from. So, it's pretty messy from where I'm sitting as well. It may look great with a nice set of books behind me, but the process is messy. And the degree, I feel quite confident in saying this, that the degree of your success will be closely related to the degree to which you're willing to just tolerate that uncertainty. And if you end up lunging for highly certain situations, it'll probably be at the cost of upside. So, in terms of whales that I watch, so rather than tell you the obvious ones, maybe some of the less obvious ones are more interesting to you. Because we know, to say Warren Buffett, Charlie Munger, it's like, yeah, whatever. It's like, you don't need me to tell you that. There's a guy in California. His name's Alan Bonello. He's just a wonderfully smart guy. He's unbelievably private. He's got a unique mind. He sees things that I don't see. And the only way I find out about stuff is investing. Is spending time with him. He's very generous if I spend time with him, but he doesn't necessarily send me his letters, and he's not reported on any reporting service. But I think he's interesting, and I'm always, there's always something going on around him that is something to think about. There's another guy that I haven't looked at so closely recently, but I think he's an unusual and remarkable thinker, is a guy called John Burbank, who's Passport Capital. He's in San Francisco, and if I can't remember exactly what, he didn't even study business, and he spent I don't know how many years teaching English in India or China or somewhere. So he's a kind of an offbeat kind of guy that I enjoy. Much better known is this guy who's now, his name's gone right out of my head, of course, because it's 3 a.m. But he's actually based in Boston. He's a private equity guy, and his name escapes me, but maybe it'll come back to me. I mentioned this guy Nick Sleep, who's actually closing his fund down, but he's an unusually thoughtful thinker about business. And one great thing about some British investors is that they're very good students of places like Hong Kong and Malaysia and Thailand, and some of these British investors have spent a lot of time studying those markets. And I think that he is equally good at looking at the American market, but is capable of taking ideas like JetBlue in the United States and then finding the JetBlue of India, or finding the JetBlue of South Asia, of East Asia. So Nick Sleep is a phenomenal guy. Those are some of them.
That's
I just tell you that I feel so honored that I'm blown away that you guys haven't, nobody's left. And closing remarks. The unexamined life is not worth living. It's a mess. The inner journey, trying to understand ourselves. This idea that when I run into problems or when I'm finding life difficult, the first thing I want to do is blame my circumstances, blame my family, my teachers, and all the answers lie within if we just give us the chance to figure them out. And all sorts of ways to do that, of which I would tell you writing a book is one, or keeping a journal is another way to do it. I think, I'll just leave you with this. Well, actually, no, I said it at Google. This idea of getting the world to resonate at a frequency that it can resonate at, that is also consistent with who we are on the inside. If we can just find that frequency so that we can, we're in bliss on the inside and the world reflects that back to us, I think we'll have a well-lived life. And actually our mission is to find that. And if we find that, we'll have extraordinary success.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.